All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you all, those of you who are rowdily attending in person, and those of you who are joining us remotely to the 2024 Gordon Sanderson Memorial Lecture. What a beautiful day in Bellingham. We're all really happy to have you all join us. And before we get started, let me just acknowledge that we're gathered here on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who've lived here from time immemorial. We express our deepest respect and gratitude for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. This lecture series would not be possible without the support of the Sanderson family. And I'm particularly happy that Trevor and Eleanor Sanderson are joining us. Yes, that's worth applause. Thank you for your continued support. Gordon Sanderson, for those of you who don't know, was born in Auburn in 1919, and after serving in the Marine Corps during World War II, he was elected to the House of Representatives in Washington in 1947, served there until 1958 when he was elected to the state Senate. In 1977, he was appointed the director of the Washington Department of Fisheries, and in the same year, President Carter appointed him to the International Pacific Salmon Fisheries Commission. So not that it has anything to do with today's topic, but it's still, I think, good to know who we are recognizing and remembering. I also want to acknowledge the support from the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, in particular, Dean Keith Russell and the WW Foundation and alumni for their support, especially Janine Bengtson, who did a lot of the groundwork to enable us to share this lecture with people who can't join us in person. I also want to thank the members of the department's PSA committee who organized not just the lecture, but also the PSA conference, which I hope you had a chance to attend or even participate in. So Professors Alamillo, Destler, and Wolf, thank you for your help. Not to forget the Political Science Association and its members, including President Malachi Phillips, who is helping us with the Zoom Q&A. And then last but not least, and maybe most importantly, our amazing staff, Department Manager Erica Steele and Program Coordinator Jesse Tanksley, without whom none of this would be possible. So now it's my pleasure to invite my colleague, Professor Weininger, to introduce this year's Sanderson Lecture.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Well, I'm just so thrilled to welcome Dr. Grace Howard to Western Washington University. Dr. Howard is an associate professor of justice studies at San Jose State University. Her book, The Pregnancy Police: Conceiving Crime, Arresting Personhood, is set to be published by University of California Press on June 11th, 2024. So yeah, so if you like the talk, there's more where that came from. You should buy her book. Dr. Howard is a Public Voices Fellow, writes a lot of op-eds, was an American Fellow with the American Association for University Women, and is co-director of the Rutgers Informed Consent Project. Dr. Howard has authored several published works, including The Pregnancy Police: Surveillance, Regulation, and Control in Harvard Law and Policy Review, which my students have read because I assign it in class every year. The Gender of Crime, second edition, The Limits of Pure White, Race Reproduction in the Methamphetamine Crisis in the Women's Rights Law Reporter, and Informed or Misinformed Consent, Abortion Policy in the United States, published in the Journal of Health Politics policy and law. Her body of work explores reproductive law and policy and the dimensions of legal personhood for people with the capacity for pregnancy. She earned her PhD in political science at Rutgers University with concentrations in women in politics and public law. And this is actually where I met Dr. Howard for the first time. We became, before we became professors, we were grad students together at Rutgers University. So I got to see this project transform from an idea into a conference paper, into a dissertation, and now finally into a really fantastic, timely, and important book. So, on a more personal note, I think Dr. Grace Howard is she's an amazing scholar, has influenced a lot of my work and the way that I approach research, and is really even a more amazing person. So I hope that you all get to meet with her a little bit, get to know her at the reception afterwards if you haven't already got a chance to do so. But with that, let's welcome Dr. Grace Howard. Thank you.
Dr. Howard,
Yes.
before you start, I apologize. Can you please share your PowerPoint with Zoom? So you'll need to undo. Thank you.
How do we do that on a PC?
And Erica, if you're also in the room, can you please check your email? Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Yes. Cool.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks. Yep. Okay, super. Good to go. Thank you so much, Kathy, for introducing me, and thank you to Western Washington University, to the Political Science Department. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a pleasure. I feel special. And I'm in a Justice Studies department now, so it feels really good to be amongst political scientists. So thank you. I guess go ahead and dive in here. In 2011, a 25-year-old white woman named Heather Capps gave birth to a healthy baby boy via cesarean section. Her newborn baby tested positive for opioids. Heather had opioid use disorder, which developed after she'd been prescribed the drug to treat her chronic back pain. Heather lived in Alabama, in a small town in the northeast part of the state. She'd heard about a local policy ordering the prosecution of women who use drugs during pregnancy on the basis that their drug use constituted a form of child abuse. She'd also heard that the withdrawal symptoms from quitting oxycodone could be dangerous for her and her pregnancy. She needed help. Heather was unemployed and relied on Medicaid and $200 a month in food stamps to support her family. She was referred to an inpatient drug treatment facility in Birmingham, nearly an hour-and-a-half drive away from her home. As a single mom with 2 young children, inpatient treatment was not an option. Who would look after her little boys? Heather was trapped. Seeing no other solutions, she decided to gradually taper down her use of oxycodone to take the lowest possible dose in an effort to protect her pregnancy. 2 days after Heather gave birth and still recovering from her C-section, she was arrested at the hospital. She spent the next 3 months in jail, separated from her newborn and her 2 other children, unable to post the $500,000 bond. Over a year after her arrest, Heather pled guilty to a charge of chemical endangerment of a minor, a Class C felony. In Alabama, crimes designated as Class C felonies are punishable by 1 to 10 years in prison. She was given a 3-year suspended sentence. If she completed a rehab program, she wouldn't have to serve the 3 years in prison. She was ordered to stay in a halfway house while she was in court-ordered rehab. During that time, she was allowed to see her children once a week. So for Heather to finally access the drug treatment that she wanted all along, she was forced to self-manage her substance use disorder through her pregnancy. She was forcibly separated from her newborn and 2 young children. She was arrested and forced to spend the first 3 months postpartum in jail. She pled guilty to a charge of felony child abuse and was then assigned to a halfway house to complete treatment, with the stress of a possible 3-year prison sentence weighing over her. This is just one of the 1,116 arrest cases included in this study. Each case is so much more than a number. These cases represent real people with histories, families, and often complicated lives. It is evident that many of the people arrested for crimes against their own pregnancies experienced trauma before their pregnancies and during their pregnancies, births, and incarcerations. These people have one thing in common. They were arrested for crimes against their own pregnancies between 1973 and 2022. The pregnancy police don't exist as a discrete agency or department. They don't carry special badges or special little uniforms. I don't know what those would look like. But the pregnancy police are all around us. Sometimes they wear scrubs or white coats. You can find them at the hospital or at the CPS office. Sometimes they're deputized to police pregnancy by law or policy. And other times they're acting only on the basis of their own beliefs. They are our neighbors, our partners, our friends. They are nurses, doctors, and social workers. Sometimes the pregnancy police may even exist in our own minds when we see a pregnant person doing something we don't approve of, like drinking coffee or lifting weights. The pregnancy police are those who are involved in surveilling, reporting, prosecuting, and incarcerating pregnant people for pregnancy-related offenses. Throughout the United States, pregnant and postpartum people have, for decades, faced charges for committing crimes against the fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses that they carry. People who test positive for drugs during or immediately after pregnancy, people who survive suicide attempts but lose their pregnancies, people injured in car accidents who have stillbirths or miscarriages, for example, all could face the possibility of lengthy prison sentences. These arrests have occurred in the absence of any declarative criminal law, and even in the presence of statutes that explicitly exclude pregnant women for being prosecuted for crimes against their own pregnancies. And yet, these arrests have occurred in essentially every state. 3 states, South Carolina, Alabama, and Tennessee, have explicitly, at one point or another, criminalized pregnant people's actions with regard to the fertilized eggs, embryos, or fetuses that they carry. And yet, arrests of pregnant people for crimes against their own pregnancies have been made in every state but Vermont and Delaware. This includes blue states with more progressive abortion laws, including where I live now in California. The widespread nature of these arrests and prosecutions suggests that webs of pregnancy police are already in place throughout the country. The criminal prosecution of pregnant people for crimes against their own pregnancies relies on a legal understanding that pregnant people are legally distinct from and enjoy fewer rights than other similarly situated non-pregnant people. Pregnant people occupy a different, lower space in the United States system of law. I call this pregnancy exceptionalism, where pregnancy, sort of in and of itself, is the factor that reduces the legal status of pregnant persons relative to other similarly situated but not pregnant persons. Typically, because of medical privacy laws, including HIPAA, a positive drug test at the doctor's office cannot legally be shared with law enforcement. But pregnant and postpartum people have been arrested after their healthcare providers reported a single positive drug test. Generally, people who survive a suicide attempt are not criminally prosecuted, but pregnant and postpartum people have been charged with felonies when they survive but lose their pregnancies. Legally competent adults are allowed to reject a course of medical treatment, but pregnant people may be cut open against their will for C-sections by court order and may be criminally charged if they resist. Pregnant people are being held criminally accountable for actions and behaviors that would otherwise be legal or at least non-prosecutable, like drinking beer, testing positive for marijuana, or taking their legal prescription medication. Pregnant people have also been charged with crimes more severe than what their actual illegal behavior would typically warrant. For example, a pregnant person caught in possession of methamphetamine might be charged with unlawful neglect of a child or delivery of drugs to a minor through the umbilical cord, instead of just drug possession. Defendants were arrested under a wide variety of charges, including unlawful performance of abortion, homicide by child abuse, distribution of drugs to a minor, involuntary manslaughter, and chemical endangerment of a minor, just to name a few. The criminalized actions included attempted suicide, illegal abortion, improper disposal of a miscarriage, failure to protect a fetus from violence, inadequate prenatal care, rejecting a course of medical treatment. In all 3 states, the pregnant person or a newborn testing positive for drugs accounted for the majority of law enforcement contact. 4 cases were brought for self-managed abortion. Let me tell you about one of these. You should note that this case happened almost 2 decades before Roe v. Wade was overturned. In 2004, Gabriela Flores was a 22-year-old mother of 3 who had migrated from Mexico to the United States to earn money for her family. She had a 5th grade education and didn't speak English. She found a job picking lettuce in South Carolina for $1.50 an hour. Then she learned she was pregnant. She later explained in a handwritten note to police, quote, "I knew I was not going to be able to support 4 kids, 2 here and 2 in Mexico," end quote. About 16 weeks pregnant, Flores was too far along to have a legal abortion in South Carolina. She could have traveled to Charlotte, North Carolina, for a legal abortion, but with such low wages, she never could have saved up $700 in time, right? The time is ticking when you're pregnant, always, for a 2nd trimester abortion. So instead, her sister mailed her some misoprostol tablets from Mexico. Misoprostol is used to treat gastric ulcers, and you can purchase it over the counter in Mexico, but it requires a prescription in the US. Misoprostol, we often shorten the name to just miso. Miso can be used to terminate a pregnancy and is one of the 2 medications used for the FDA-approved medication abortion protocol. According to the WHO, miso, or the brand name Cytotec, alone can be used to safely self-manage an abortion. So Flores took the tablets and ended her pregnancy, expelling the fetus onto her bed. Her housemate helped her bury it in the backyard, which I know some people might find troubling, but is actually not an uncommon practice when people miscarry at home. The housemate told a neighbor what happened, and that neighbor contacted law enforcement. 6 days after she ended her pregnancy, Gabriela Flores was arrested and charged for the self-management of her abortion and for failure to notify a coroner about the fetal remains. Nothing in South Carolina says you need to call a coroner for fetal remains. She was held on a $10,000 bond. The roommate who helped her was charged with obstruction of justice. Apparently, the county solicitor had initially sought homicide charges against Flores, and he had wanted to seek the death penalty in her case. Flores wrote, quote, "Please understand me. My kids need me a lot. They're little. Please forgive me," end quote. Flores spent 4 months in a county jail before she was even granted a public defense attorney, a violation of her 6th Amendment right to appointed counsel. Flores ultimately pled guilty to the illegal abortion and was sentenced to serve an additional 3 months in jail, credit for time served. 3 arrests were made after people survived attempts to end their lives. Suicide is not a crime, but attempting suicide during pregnancy has been determined to be criminal in these cases. In a case from South Carolina in 2009, a 22-year-old white woman was arrested after she survived a jump from her apartment window. She was 8 months pregnant and struggling with bipolar disorder. She and her boyfriend, whom she lived with, had had an argument earlier that day. He woke up in the night and went to smoke a cigarette, and she woke up and he wasn't there. She figured that he had left her, and she was really distraught. She leapt from her 5th floor window in an effort to end her life and landed on an awning 4 stories down, which saved her. She sustained life-threatening injuries, and she lost her pregnancy, but ultimately survived. Around 6 months later, once her medical condition had stabilized, she was arrested for involuntary manslaughter. She pled guilty to the charges and was given a sentence of 18 months in prison, suspended upon serving 2 months in prison and 18 months on probation, which it can be very difficult to comply with probation orders, yes. One arrest was made in 2013 when a 21-year-old white woman from Tennessee rejected medical advice. This is not considered a crime. It's actually considered a fairly fundamental right that legally competent adults can reject medical care. But in this case, she was found criminally culpable. She went to the hospital when she started having labor pains. The doctor treating her thought she should be transferred by ambulance to a different hospital, fearing for her condition. The details there were not shared, this part of the medical record. Medical records are often part of these case files, which is somewhat disturbing. They should be private, but that part was not included in the case file. So instead, she left the hospital, and she ended up giving birth in the hospital parking lot, and her newborn died soon after. It's not clear that her newborn would have survived if she'd given birth in the hospital, but that's what happened. She was charged with second-degree murder, and was arrested and held on a $50,000 bond. The charges were eventually reduced from second-degree murder to aggravated child abuse and neglect. In 2018, a 28-year-old Black woman named Marche Jones was about 5 months pregnant when she got into a fight with a woman named Ebony Jemison, who was dating the father of Marche's baby. Ebony had a gun and used it to shoot Marche in the abdomen, causing a stillbirth. Marche was interrogated by law enforcement for about 20 minutes while she was receiving emergency medical care. Several months later, Marche was arrested, charged with, and indicted for manslaughter for her pregnancy loss. Ebony Jemison, then 23, was not charged, as prosecutors argued that she had acted in self-defense. About a month after her arrest, after much public outcry and attention drawn to the actual text of that statute, the charges against Jones were dropped. But without that international media attention, I don't think that ever would have happened. Okay. There's one case from 2014 from Tennessee. Police attempted to pull over a 22-year-old white woman because she wasn't wearing her seatbelt. She was also driving with a suspended license, and to avoid criminal penalties, she tried to flee the scene. After a vehicle chase, she left the car and ran on foot from the police officer, but she was eventually caught. She was like super pregnant, so sure. She was charged with felony evading arrest and driving on a suspended license, which are standard charges for her actions. However, because she was also just about 9 months pregnant when this happened, she was also charged with felony reckless endangerment of the fetus she carried. Of the 1,116 arrests included in this study, 1,100, about 98.5%, involved substance use. We need to examine some of the context and history here to understand how it all went down and why it did. In 1985, Dr. Ira Chasnoff and his colleagues' study of cocaine use during pregnancy was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. They found that babies exposed to cocaine in utero had significant depression of interactive behavior and a poor organizational response to environmental stimuli. Though the study was limited in scope, really small n on this study, like in the like less than 10, not generalizable, not demonstrating causality, it was picked up by the media. Fetal personhood had crashed into the war on drugs. Echoing earlier eugenic thought about threatening others, irresponsible breeding, damaged children that society would have to deal with and pay for. The policy response to crack cocaine, and specifically to the idea of crack babies, targeted mothers, right? Mothers who recklessly exposed their children to drugs and who carelessly gave birth to what were essentially described as monsters, children who were fated to grow into erratic, violent, irresponsible adults, while good, honest Americans were stuck with the social and economic costs. Pregnant drug users violate cultural definitions of appropriate, respectable, disciplined motherhood. Instead of being viewed as moral, pure, self-sacrificial, pregnant drug users are seen as immoral, polluted, and selfish. Consider the use of the terms clean and dirty for both tests of STIs and substance use. People with STIs or who test positive for drugs are dirty people. Pregnant drug users defined as dirty for their substance use and lack of sexual responsibility conflict with images of pure, clean, white motherhood. What's more, the description of the supposed pharmacology of crack seemed to attack mothers directly. The drug was said to destroy the natural impulse to mother. The pregnant crack addict was portrayed as an irresponsible and selfish woman who put her love for crack above her love for her children. This image was used to justify welfare cuts, forced sterilizations, the criminal penalties I've been talking about. In the US tradition of puritanical bootstraps liberalism, the problem was once again defined in terms of individual failure and not systemic oppression and deprivation. Crack exposure in utero was supposed to cause devastating, irreparable harm. These claims were taken up and exaggerated by the news media. For example, the Washington Post published a column by Charles Krauthammer, a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist and political pundit, that warned, quote, "The inner city crack epidemic is now giving birth to the newest horror, a bio underclass, a generation of physically damaged cocaine babies whose biological inferiority is stamped at birth. A race of subhuman drones whose future is closed to them from day one. Theirs will be a life of certain suffering, of probable deviance, of permanent inferiority. At best, a menial life of severe deprivation. And all of this is biologically determined from birth. The dead babies may be the lucky ones," end quote. South Carolina's criminalization of pregnancy was a direct response to this panic. During this period, all but one of the women arrested in South Carolina was Black. The white woman who was arrested, it was noted on her medical record, was partnered with a Black man. He was the father of her child. This is inherently racist. There were significant flaws in a lot of the research on prenatal crack exposure, which commonly failed to include control groups. Any of our methods people, I'm picking up on this. No control groups. They were unable to distinguish between powder and crack cocaine. And powder cocaine never carried the same stigma that crack cocaine did, right? It was a glamorous drug. A more recent 25-year longitudinal study found, quote, "no significant differences between cocaine-exposed children and the controls." They argued poverty is a more powerful influence on the outcome of inner city children than gestational exposure to cocaine. And though the myth of the crack baby, we've debunked this, but it's like a zombie fact. We keep killing it and it just keeps coming back to life. And so the crack panic of the 1980s and 1990s eventually waned in a lot of ways, and a second wave of pregnancy-related arrests emerged, this time focused on meth. Heightened attention to the use of methamphetamine emerged in the late 1990s and grew through the mid-2000s. With meth, images of bad Black mothers and damaged Black children in poor urban areas were replaced by poor rural white women in trailer parks and their damaged white children. I'm from Virginia, we would call white trash, yeah. Cheaper and more accessible to the poor than other prescription stimulants like Ritalin and Adderall, something that probably a lot of people in this room take regularly. Meth could be manufactured or cooked at home using items you can find at the grocery store. Meth was also supposed to be uniquely addictive. Law enforcement experts attested that, quote, "only 1% of meth users can overcome their addiction," end quote. The media, again, ran wild. One sheriff told reporters, "Meth is the overwhelming drug of choice among murderers." A 2003 Rolling Stone headline cautioned, "Crystal meth, plague in the heartland." In 1998, President Bill Clinton's drug czar, Barry McCaffrey, announced, "Meth is the worst drug to ever hit America, and officials need to work to eradicate the poor man's cocaine." Reports about the harmful medical impact of the drug painted a similarly apocalyptic picture. Meth users were described as suffering from chronic wasting disease, and meth was said to turn people into monsters. Meth addicts were almost described as zombies, the new fast kind. In response to this panic, arrests of disproportionately low-income white women began in Alabama, which is interesting because nationwide, these arrests have very disproportionately targeted poor women of color. So, chemically synthesized in 1887, meth was not used medicinally until 1927, and it began to be sold commercially in 1932. You can get prescription meth today. It's typically sold under the name Desoxyn. It is a prescription drug. It's approved for weight loss, attention deficit disorder, and sleep disorders like narcolepsy. Meth was identified as a drug of abuse in the 60s, and its non-prescription use was primarily associated with people who worked long hours, like night and swing shift workers and truck drivers. It was also associated with motorcycle gangs and gay men. The stimulating effect of this drug helped folks stay awake for work. Meth is chemically and pharmacologically similar to amphetamine, Adderall, and even, quote, "appears to produce a similar dose-related profile of effects in humans," end quote. One study went so far as to say, quote, "there are no known neurobiological differences in action between meth and amphetamine," end quote. The policy response to these drug panics was incredibly punitive. Instead of addressing the causes of substance use disorder or providing care and services to substance users or pregnant people more broadly, people were thrown into prisons and jails, and their children were taken from them. In my study, people were still pregnant in 208 cases, or about 19% of cases at the time of their arrest. They often gave birth in custody, shackled in the hospital, or unattended in a jail cell because nobody came to help them when they were in labor. Notably, some of the defendants who were pregnant at the time of their arrest could have legally procured an abortion, which an interesting legal conflict before Dobbs. There's a really bizarre case where someone was facing prosecution but also wanted an abortion. If you want to talk about that in the Q&A, I would love to. A total of 17 defendants were in their first trimester when they were arrested, and 4 were as early as 6 weeks gestation, 2 weeks after a missed period, prosecutable child abuse. One woman who was still pregnant when she was arrested and jailed wrote a letter to her judge. These letters were often the most heartbreaking part of doing this work. I'm typically looking at, bureaucratic form case files. Prison letters are handwritten. So you can see their handwriting, you can see their spelling, you can, it feels like you get a little glimpse into folks. She wrote, "I don't want to have my baby here in prison." In another letter, she explained that she was 4 months pregnant when she was first arrested and was still in custody when she gave birth to her newborn baby, who was immediately taken away from her. Several people gave birth while shackled or handcuffed to the hospital bed, which is what you see depicted here. The use of shackles on pregnant or postpartum people is especially problematic. I would argue that it's always problematic, but especially so when folks are pregnant, as it presents unique health risks, including the potential for injury or placental abruption caused by falls, delayed progress of labor caused by impaired mobility. Sometimes, I don't know if any of y'all have given birth, but sometimes you gotta move around. Delayed receipt of emergency care when corrections officers need to remove the shackles, often ankle-to-ankle shackles, to allow for assessment and intervention. So imagine the guard who is assigned to you is taking a cigarette break right at the moment where somebody needs to get in there, right? We have to wait for him to come back with the key. Shackling during birth has been found to be a violation of the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment and a violation of international human rights law, being described as a form of torture. The threat of harm posed by shackling, both for pregnant people and their newborns, undermines the claim that pregnant people should remain in police custody for protection during their pregnancies. The shackling of pregnant people with the use of a chain or belt, often around the belly, or chaining them to the bed during labor, are both potent images of the criminalization of pregnancy and the intrusion of policing in healthcare. People gave birth in a variety of locations, including more than 100 different hospitals between those 3 states alone. Non-hospital birth locations included a motel bathroom, the side of the highway, an abandoned home. Non-hospital births were overrepresented in this study. In the US, less than 2% of births take place outside of the hospital, while 7% of the births in this study occurred outside of the hospital. It is likely, this is from talking to various practitioners in the state, that we are seeing this overrepresentation of out-of-hospital births because people are too afraid to go to the hospital to have their babies. Would you go if you knew you could be arrested and have your children taken from you? Or would you try to find some other kind of options, right? They did not feel safe and respected often in these settings. People were detected and reported for pregnancy-related offenses by friends, family members, neighbors, healthcare providers, social workers, and police officers. But only about 96 of these cases, about 8.6% of these arrests, were initiated by law enforcement. Healthcare providers reported their patients to social services or to law enforcement in 853 cases, about 75% of cases. Of the 1,100 arrests involving substance use, about 77% occurred after a drug test administered in a medical setting. So if you're going to be arrested for a crime against your own pregnancy, odds are the gatekeeper, it's the doctor and nurse whose duty is to protect and treat you. I identified more than 100 hospitals, doctors' offices, medical clinics involved in making these reports, which suggests strategic choice of birth location is not a way to avoid prosecution. In at least one case, law enforcement used social media to gather information about a defendant. After she gave birth, one woman's newborn was drug tested using the meconium, or the newborn's first bowel movement. Law enforcement was notified of the positive drug test, and they began an investigation. They searched her publicly available Facebook profile and found a pregnancy announcement post. They used this information to argue that she was aware of her pregnancy when she used drugs. This is the only documented case in this study where social media was used as supporting criminal evidence. But we have seen electronic information used in other states where there have been prosecutions. Things like search histories, text messages, even electronic purchase data, like from a credit card. However, I know a lot of people were very worried about their period trackers after Dobbs. Every documented arrest of a pregnant person for a crime against their pregnancy in the US, the initial point of contact for law enforcement was a person telling them, right? It wasn't like, we're gonna do a sweep and everyone who said abortion, we're gonna flag them. It's people. And then we can use the electronic evidence after the fact to support a prosecution. In another case, an Alabama Crisis Pregnancy Center, or Anti-Abortion Center, CPCs, gave information to law enforcement. Now, most folks who go to crisis pregnancy centers, they're either folks who want abortions and who have been tricked, or they are folks who plan to continue carrying their pregnancies and need support. And that is what was true in this case. After she gave birth, so CPCs, they're anti-abortion centers. They frequently pose as actual healthcare providers to lure, gather information on, and provide misinformation to prospective abortion patients. They advertise free ultrasounds to bring people through the doors. There's a lot of great research on CPCs coming out right now. They're very manipulative. Whatever your thoughts are about abortion, this is manipulative. So in this case, a woman was arrested after her newborn tested positive for cocaine. In 2016, she'd sought a free ultrasound at the Alabama Save a Life Center. After her arrest, the center gave law enforcement information about the date of her last menstrual period, the regularity of her menstrual cycle, and her birth control practices. Like in the aforementioned case, this information was used to argue that she was aware of her pregnancy when she was using drugs. This is the first documented case of a CPC giving information about a client to law enforcement. And even though we know healthcare providers are handing this information over, the people who work at CPCs are generally not healthcare providers. They almost never have healthcare training. And so they are governed by zero medical ethics, right? They can kind of do whatever they want. There's evidence that people with the capacity for pregnancy made conscious efforts to avoid being reported to the authorities and arrested. Indeed, when healthcare providers have essentially become an arm of local law enforcement, patients in need of care might make other plans. Numerous studies have found that punitive test and report policies deter folks from medical care for fear that they will be reported, incarcerated, and lose custody of their kids. Pregnant people who use drugs have strategies to avoid detection, including isolating themselves, skipping prenatal appointments, and avoiding treatment altogether. There's also evidence that the stigma associated with drug use during pregnancy has the effect of driving folks away from care because care providers treat them with such disdain, hostility, sometimes even violence. I've seen nurses deny pain medication to folks because they have a history of being drug users. Evasive efforts identified in my study included giving false identification or fake names at the hospital, fleeing the hospital without their newborns, withholding the fact of their pregnancies from jail staff when the pregnant person was arrested initially for something else. They don't want to be like, oh, by the way, you're pregnant, so we're going to add on some charges there, right? Avoiding prenatal care and giving birth outside of healthcare settings. One woman finally went to the hospital only when she was on the brink of sepsis from an infection in her foot. Another woman received prenatal care at the hospital and never returned once she was told she was under investigation. At least 2 women fled the hospital, only 3 hours giving birth. Still another woman attempted to flee her state of Tennessee when she went into labor. She got into her car and started driving, hoping to get over the state lines to somewhere where her baby wouldn't be taken and she wouldn't be charged with a crime. And she ended up giving birth on the side of the highway. She did not make it out of Tennessee. These examples illustrate that, as other research has shown, this punitive effort to help pregnant drug users by coercing them into treatment is not helpful. The threat of arrest actually created harm. So let's talk about what the experience of being arrested is like when you've just given birth. Most of the defendants were arrested at the hospital, something they found humiliating, as they were visible to others in this public space. They were commonly shackled with wrists and ankles joined to a belt worn around the belly. They were also typically arrested while wearing hospital-issue gowns that are open in the back, leaving their buttocks exposed. In deposition, one woman explained how she felt when she was arrested and shackled. "I was devastated. I was in total shock. I didn't understand what was going on. I never broken the law before, and for them to just come and arrest me, I couldn't understand. I was numb. I felt like nobody. I felt like there was a hole that I could just crawl in and die. I couldn't respond to anything. It was horrible." People sentenced for crimes against their own pregnancies were sentenced to serve time in prisons, jails, and on probation. They were ordered to drug court or court-mandated drug treatment. In a few cases, they were ordered to be sterilized or to use LARCs, long-acting reversible contraceptives, as a condition of probation or bond. Many cases resulted in prison or jail time. For the sake of comparison, in the 3 study states, penalties for homicide, like normal, like we would all recognize this as homicide, range from 15 years to life, and also includes the death penalty in some cases. For the pregnancy cases, the straight sentences for incarceration and probation range from 1 month to 20 years and 1 year to 20 years, respectively. Split prison sentences range from 1 month to 8.5 years, to be followed by 1 year to 18 years on probation. Failure to comply with prison, jail, or probation requirements in these split sentences results in the full prison sentence being applied. And these sentences range from 6 months to 20 years in prison. Among those who receive straight sentences in prison, the mean sentence is 66 months. So these are not short sentences at all. Defendants describe their experiences in jail and prison, commonly mentioning the lack of quality medical care, unhygienic conditions, fear, and a sense that prisons and jails just weren't the right place for pregnant and postpartum people to be. In the deposition, one Black woman explained, "It was disgusting. I can't even describe it. It was a cell with bars, and it was a toilet that was filthy dirty. The floors were filthy dirty. The bench that I had to sit on was filthy dirty, and it was stink. It was disgusting." Another woman was freezing cold in the jail, but didn't want to use the provided blanket, testifying that it looked like somebody else done used the blankets to wipe their backsides with them. Postpartum women also reported being denied menstrual products in jail, and the shame and disgust they felt after they bled through their clothing. Most of the people arrested for crimes against their own pregnancies had already given birth, and so they entered the jail during their postpartum period, a very important period for bonding and for kind of recovering your own health as the person who gave birth. In 26 cases, defendants were arrested on the same day that they gave birth. In 128 cases, arrests occurred within a week of birth. 264 cases, they were arrested within 30 days of birth. One woman talked about being arrested when she tested positive for marijuana, not even 10 days after giving birth. Quote, "I was still going through postpartum, still bleeding, still had stitches down there." She reported that the nurses at the jail were kind, but that it took almost a full day to get a pad to absorb her bleeding, and she never received the pain medication she needed to treat her pelvis, which she injured during the birth. Many of these sentences included drug court. That's the cover of my book. So touted as a less punitive innovation to respond to the reality of substance use disorder. So many people have substance use disorder. What are we going to do? Drug court is court mandated and sometimes court designed drug treatment. So you have judges deciding what appropriate medical treatment will be. The Drug Policy Alliance asserts that, among other things, drug courts have made the criminal justice system more punitive towards addiction, not less. A deferred sentence to drug treatment can be viewed in some ways as an indeterminate sentence. You are sentenced for as long as it takes for you to clear this program. It's supposed to be unconstitutional. Even if a court-ordered drug treatment program is designed to take a pre-specified number of months, breaking rules or relapsing can extend your stay in that program. A 2017 study by Physicians for Human Rights found that overall, drug courts, framed as a blend of criminal punishment and therapeutic treatment, quote, largely failed at providing treatment to those who truly needed it, and filled up limited treatment spaces with court-mandated patients who didn't always need the care. The study concluded in many cases, court officials with no medical background mandated inappropriate treatment not rooted in the evidence base. Pregnant or postpartum people were placed in various drug rehab programs on pre-trial diversions. It is not at all clear that all of these folks needed treatment, as a single positive drug test cannot demonstrate that a person has substance use disorder. All it can demonstrate is that person just tested positive for a drug. Research has shown that pregnancy can motivate pregnant folks with substance use disorder to seek treatment, and that the vast majority of women who use drugs make an effort to reduce their consumption during pregnancy because they care about the health of their pregnancy and their future child. So though this can be a really rich, important moment for connecting pregnant people with the resources and care that they want and need, it can be so difficult to access these forms of care in the US, and we have not decided to make it easier, especially for folks who are pregnant. Quality accredited drug treatment is really hard to find. Less than about 51% of US drug treatment programs are accredited. That's shameful. Only about 50% of drug treatment facilities offered medications for substance use disorder, so you don't have to go through withdrawals. Horrifying feeling. They don't test for infections. They don't have self-help groups. They don't have employment assistance, transportation assistance. These are all elements that federal agencies have defined as indicative of higher quality drug treatment. Many drug treatment facilities in the US are religiously oriented, offering faith-based treatment services. And though religiously affiliated drug treatment programs can be useful or comforting to some people, not everyone sentenced to receive care in such facilities believes in the premise or finds the treatment effective. And it is worrisome that a government institution would sentence someone to complete a religious drug treatment program, and specifically, they're always Christian, if we're being real about it. One woman was kicked out of a Christian rehab program twice for being out of compliance. The first time, she was medically discharged because her psychological well-being was a concern. According to a note in her case file, the client disclosed during an in-house AA meeting that she didn't trust anyone at the facility, including the counselors, which, like, court mandated. I mean, why would you? Client even went further to disclose that she had thoughts of running away from the facility and going to the truck stops in hopes that someone would kidnap and kill her. At no time did client ever disclose any of these feelings with her counselor. Her probation officer arranged a meeting with the doctor who put her on some kind of medication, it's not clear what, and sent her back to the Christian rehab facility. Her second discharge relates to her apparently not taking the Christian orientation of this treatment facility seriously. The facility noted, one Saturday, client was reprimanded for being dressed inappropriately, and her response was, everyone else is doing it. And they wrote it in bold on the note, which is why I said it that way. Sunday, she was caught laughing and giggling with another client during Sunday school. And on Monday night, we had a guest speaker, and the defendant spent time writing and passing notes with other clients. Issues finding accessible drug treatment options appeared over and over again in these cases. One woman was ordered to attend treatment as a condition for her release from jail or on bond. She went to the inpatient treatment center, but then she started having seizures. Unequipped to care for her, the facility medically released her. The medical discharge, however necessary, meant that the defendant was out of compliance with the terms of her bond agreement. And so she was sent back to jail. Still others were held in jail indefinitely when there were no beds available at the local treatment facilities. An unconstitutional practice. One county in Alabama in particular was holding everyone until there was a treatment bed available, and sometimes that meant months or years. For example, a 23-year-old white woman who tested positive for marijuana early in her pregnancy was arrested and held in county jail in Etowah, Alabama. Her pregnancy was considered high risk, and there was a history of miscarriage in her family. Her jail cell was crowded, and the only bed space available to sleep on was a top bunk, which was not safe for her to use given her condition. Arrested at 6 weeks of pregnancy, she was taken to the local hospital 6 weeks later when she started bleeding. She was diagnosed with subchorionic hematoma, and back at the jail, she kept bleeding for another 5 weeks while she suffered from hunger and slept on the floor. Another woman was arrested 6 days after giving birth while visiting her baby in the NICU because she had a false positive test for meth and was taking prescription Subutex, which is a medication that helps prevent opioid withdrawals. She too was held in jail when no bed at a treatment facility was available to her. By examining the experiences of people charged with pregnancy-specific crimes, we're better able to understand the direct impact of test, report, and arrest policies, and of arrests for crimes against a person's own pregnancy more broadly. The experiences and case outcomes indicate that these arrests and prosecutions are very much felt as punitive treatment that is humiliating, denigrating, traumatizing, and medically inappropriate. Instead of encouraging drug treatment for drug-related arrests, these policies incentivized hiding from, avoiding, or evading healthcare, a direct opposite outcome than the stated goal of pushing people into treatment. A lack of workable and culturally and medically appropriate drug treatment options meant that people who desperately wanted to enroll couldn't. And so they were arrested instead. Some defendants keenly and perhaps accurately articulated a sense that they had lost their rights when they noticed they were being treated differently than the people who weren't pregnant. While drug scare narratives tend to focus on overstated harms and villainize people being targeted for arrest to justify punitive treatment, examining the experiences of the pregnant and postpartum folks who are punished unmasks the very real harms being caused by the punitive policies themselves. The pregnancy police exist outside of the law. They are in our attitudes and beliefs. They're in our moralizing, our respectability politics, and our strategic silence and distancing from marginalized people deemed unworthy of care or too politically risky to publicly support. Unless these social and cultural attitudes can be changed, the pregnancy police will still exist, and people with the capacity for pregnancy will continue to be surveilled, controlled, and punished. Afrofuturist author Octavia Butler wrote that there is nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. Stepping away from the historical urge to treat people with the capacity for pregnancy as a lesser class of person and to control, punish, and surveil them requires us to envision new possibilities, to find a new sun. Just as these oppressive and harmful systems are created and sustained, new ways of being oriented around human rights and social justice can be envisioned, created, and sustained. In the words of my friend and mentor, nurse PhD, Dr. Monica McLemore, we can make all this different. Indeed, we must. Thank you. So I guess what we're Q&A-ing it. There's one. And I'm going to repeat your question so the Zoom folks can hear it. Okay. Okay. So the question is about like, how are we doing drug testing? And we're talking about like, obviously you can detect substances, certain substances in hair after it grows long after the fact, right? There's a lot of case law on what kinds of substances you're allowed to test and when and why. And they make distinctions between like urine and blood, like it's easier to get pee than blood, right? I mean, it's so bizarre that these are things that would need to be like adjudicated. But typically in these cases, they are using urine. Sometimes it's blood. They're often using the newborn's urine, blood, or meconium to do these tests. And so, yeah, like certain substances, right? Like if you smoked weed 31 days before you gave birth, maybe they're not going to catch you, right? So it is somewhat haphazard. We also don't quite know when, why they do these tests. Like the hospitals often will not release the policies about when they decide to drug test someone and what happens with a positive test, which seems just bananas to me. Like these policies should be publicly available, but they would not share them with me. So it seems pretty clear that in some cases, it is just random doctors and nurses. Like that one looks like they could have done something, or I don't know, I'm from a small town. I don't know how many of y'all are from small towns, but like, we know that girl's family and I mean, I think that I really suspect that that is part of what's happening. That's part of the next project. There was a Supreme Court case that dealt with the drug testing, Ferguson versus City of Charleston. And by the time it went to the court, it wasn't even really about pregnancy. It was about what constitutes an illegal search, because they were doing these drug tests without like probable cause, and they didn't have warrants, and they were not doing the drug tests for medical purposes. Ferguson versus City of Charleston. So like, you're doing this for law enforcement purposes, not for health purposes. But unfortunately, that case only applied to public hospitals. And if you test the newborn, then that's like a full-on workaround. But interesting to read if you want to get into the like, at one point we were testing people who worked on the railroads, make sure they're not too drunk to be safely running the railroad. I mean, it's an interesting area. Good question. Back there. Yes, yes, and yes. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it described as cosplaying. That like you can see the data. I forget the exact percentage, but it's like way less than 10% of CPCs have anyone licensed to practice medicine there at all. And even the free ultrasounds they provide, they're not diagnostic, because these people are not qualified to do diagnostic ultrasounds. No, they get like special carve-outs from every kind of regulation, and we fund them, right? The state and federal governments fund these places. Oh, yeah, there's a question here.
That requires certification to utilize ultrasounds. So now we won't have that issue in our crisis pregnancy center. We have 2 in town. And the forms all say they're HIPAA compliant because they do not charge insurance.
Yeah.
It's the gray area.
Yeah.
So see it, it'll say it, but it's not.
And there are some new HIPAA guidelines from the federal government, like very recent Biden administration ones. And in particular, they seem concerned with the idea of, for example, someone from Idaho coming to Washington, having a legal abortion here, returning home, and then like overzealous prosecutors getting the records or subpoenaing the medical records. And so the new HIPAA regulations would say that for reproductive care, you can't do that. I don't think using drugs during pregnancy will be counted. I think that this is like a really narrow about protecting folks leaving the state to have abortion, and it won't affect these drug-related arrests at all. Yes. Yes. Yes, yes.
First is, have you seen progress in the laws over time? And my second question is, for all of those pregnant women who are on who are not pregnant, what is happening? Like, where is the, like, what are other things doing that is working or that is better, that sort of help us understand how we might do more?
Okay, so the first part of your question is about sort of the numbers and the progress that in comparison to the number of people giving birth annually, that these numbers don't really seem big. And so you're wondering about how it's progressed over time. And then the second part of your question, can you remind me? Sorry, repeating for Zoom.
What are places that are not?
Okay. Okay, great. And so yes, the second part is places that aren't arresting folks. Is it working? Can we learn from them? What might we try instead? I have seen there are some trends happening here. So the first arrest that I have documented is from Tennessee in 1986, and that was a suicide attempt that they charged as an illegal abortion. So it didn't start right away after Roe, as far as I can tell. And one of the challenges with this study is that this data, it's all raw data. Like, I had to make this database, and I know it's an undercount because they're charging people under so many different kinds of charges. I can't be like, give me the pregnancy charges. Like, that just doesn't exist. So in Alabama, I sort of could. Most of their pregnancy arrests were done under their chemical endangerment law. And so we FOIA'd all the chemical endangerment arrests, and we picked out the ones that were designated female, and then we ordered the records and looked at that. I know it's an undercount. It does seem like, well, certain people are targeted more than others. So public hospitals, much more likely to engage in this than private hospitals, though private hospitals have as well, especially religiously oriented ones. But if you are someone who's reliant on Medicaid and there's only one hospital where you can give birth and have it covered by Medicaid, in South Carolina, that's the hospital that was testing. And so that's why it was all poor Black women, because that's like almost everyone going to that hospital was poor and Black. I have seen over time, especially since Roe v. Wade was overturned, they are making the arrests earlier in pregnancy now. This is where the 6-week ones came in. Those were all happening sort of later in the game. And I interviewed prosecutors for part of this project, the ones who were among the first in their state to start kind of playing loosey-goosey with the law and using it to prosecute people. And a few of them did mention that Roe v. Wade was a hindrance, that they would love to be arresting people early in pregnancy because you figure most of the harm, if any, would be happening earlier in fetal development. And they really wanted to do that. But we come into this conflict with like pre-viability. I'm worried that a higher judge might shut this down. So we're only going to charge people that just gave birth, and we decided to test them. The testing is really haphazard. So it's hard to say. Like, we know that it's happening in every state, and these are just the 3 that ever made it official. What are people doing that's better? So a lot of states have non-criminal punitive laws. And research has shown that those are pretty much just as bad as the criminal ones, that people are losing their kids. And so they're avoiding all of these agencies. Things that we know are more helpful: more treatment beds, harm reduction approaches, recognizing that a lot of people use drugs and sometimes those people are pregnant, and sometimes it's appropriate for them to keep using drugs while they're pregnant, which seems weird, but like, that's what the doctors say. So it's a thing. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever get to a place where like no pregnant person ever uses drugs, but also most drugs aren't that bad to use when you're pregnant. And I'm not telling you all to like go out and do your pregnancy drugs, but the harms specifically articulated around illegal drugs are way overstated. We know that there are substances that can have a negative impact, right? Fetal alcohol syndrome is real, but even fetal alcohol syndrome is way loosey-goosier than we initially thought. So like you can have two people, both of them drink the same amount. One has really good prenatal care and a great diet, and the other has neither of those two things. Which one do you think is going to have a child diagnosed with FAS? And that's something that we've kind of parsed out. There's a lot of moving pieces. I'm honestly still digging in to figure out like what exactly is happening at the very local level. Thank you. A Zoom question.
Someone wanted to know, Mary wanted to know if there's any research for similar issues in other countries or figure out what the
Yes. So there are similar issues in other countries, and I am an Americanist, so I'm sorry. But I do know, like, for example, in a few different parts of Central and South America, and even some cases in Mexico, that people are charged with crimes against fetuses. If you recognize a fetus or a fertilized egg or an embryo as a legal person, the rights of the person carrying that embryo cannot stay the same. They go away. And so like these are often states that ban abortion. They do recognize a fetus as a legal entity. And so, yeah, it happens all over. I would love to see kind of a massive global movement. And I know that we're there yet, but I mean, we have seen, I guess, in Central and South America, some really incredible social movements that have liberalized abortion in those states. So things can always change. Nothing is ever settled. Yes.
Studying, medical ethics have changed. There's a much stronger public health component in medical ethics, and I'm wondering how much I'm not surprised, but I am disturbed by the physician violating confidentiality, being in a position to really kind of haphazardly decide when somebody's a danger or not. So have you looked into the debate over the requirements to report? I think arose in the 1990s. And school administrators have to report much more to social services. And how much is that a factor?
I think that's a really interesting question. The question was about kind of the idea that you're required to make reports, that healthcare providers are mandated reporters, they're required to make these reports. And even, I mean, in these cases, they're like arguably not, except in these 3 states. Right, and you could argue that it's actually straight up illegal for them to do it. They're interpreting the fetus as a child. Healthcare providers are required to report abused children. CAPTA, I think, is what you were referring to. It requires healthcare providers to report child abuse. But is drug use the same thing as child abuse? Is sort of the like question there. I would say no. Some would say yes. Of course, the two can be combined. I mean, someone who's abusing drugs can also be abusing children, right? So CAPTA was influential, but there was also a really interesting shift towards, in the book, it's called Angels and Anti-Mothers, that in sort of the progressive period, like late 1800s into the Victorian era, that the woman is like supposed to keep the home pure and moral, and she has to be like the most upstanding one in the entire family because she needs to tame her husband into making him like a good citizen. I mean, this is, what they're talking about. And there was a shift that happened. And actually part of this shift, so doctors started noticing children with broken bones and weird bruises. And at one point, they actually coined the term child abuse. It was not, I mean, people were supposed to hit their kids. Like, have you seen, what is the rule of thumb guy, Blackwell? Yeah, like you have to beat your kids, otherwise they'll be bad people and they'll go to hell. I mean, so we went from that to like, uh-oh, maybe we shouldn't be beating our kids, to, uh-oh, these moms are bad and they could beat their kids. And that sort of aligns with when abortion became re-legalized, right, with Roe. So it is really interesting, kind of all of these various like public health opinions mingling together. Yes, you had your hand up a lot. Hi. Yeah. Yes.
So I was curious how like that implementation has affected research.
So I haven't looked myself at any cases from that state. But I do think it's really interesting. And then like just recently recriminalizing it, yes? It's like, have we even done this long enough to find out if it's working? And have we provided the like scaffolding, right? Like just decriminalizing something isn't enough. Like you need to provide people with resources and services, right? Yeah. 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 Oh, it's just so sad. I think I mean, so I have seen arrests made for legal substance use, right? So like there were some cases where cigarettes and alcohol were implicated, but there also was a case where a woman was taking her legally prescribed pain meds, and her doctor knew she was pregnant and gave her the pain meds. And then she tested positive at the hospital, and the hospital was like, it's cool, those are your prescription pain meds. And then the sheriff found out and decided to make it a thing. Right? So like even legal substances, legal prescription meds that you can like wave your prescription in the air, not safe. That was a pain medication case, but I mean, look at the warning labels on your meds, y'all, because I mean, you're not supposed to do anything when you're not supposed to eat sprouts. You're not allowed to have soft cheese when you're pregnant. You know, I mean, so I don't know. I think of the meds, like I take depression meds, you're not supposed to do that during pregnancy. Which would be worse for my pregnancy? Me being seriously depressed or me taking these medications? Oh, cool.
So I hear a lot of the payment specifically in politics of even how those have been prescribed
Yes.
the past year to now.
Yes.
How we can't be what pain.
We just don't even know. Yeah, our pain medicine is like in its infancy, really, like quality pain medicine. And so, you know, we see like pharmaceutical companies have financial interest in getting as many people prescribed these drugs as possible and downplay how addictive they are, right? And should be getting in big trouble for that. And also, there are a lot of people who have chronic, serious pain who cannot function without access to those medications. And both of those things are true. So like, what do you do with that? We haven't been good at dealing with it so far. Lock them up. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you knew this, but being poor actually means you're a bad person in the United States. Right. I mean, and this comes again from like some of the kind of Puritan roots that God will favor good people with fortune. I mean, this is still like Calvinist thought, right? And so if you're poor, you must deserve it. Is really, I think so many people still believe, even if they don't necessarily associate it with God, I think it still trickles down to this like, poor people must have messed up somehow as individuals, right? Yeah. Yes, Kathy.
Two questions that I think kind of go maybe hand in hand. One person would like to clarify kind of what is unconstitutional here, because I think you had said that. So yeah, is it a drug test policies, holding women in jail until they can get treatment, or like where is like the unconstitutionality? And then the second question is there any kind of repercussions for healthcare workers that get involved with the fight?
Great questions. So I'll do the second first, and then you'll probably have to remind me about the first one. I have not seen a single case of a healthcare provider getting in trouble. And when I talk to future nurses and doctors, I make sure they know that, Because here's the deal. I cannot believe that every doctor and nurse is interested in putting their patients in harm's way like this. To the extent that they are ordered to by their jobs, or it's just something some people at their jobs do, we don't quite know yet. But I know there are people who are trying to find workarounds to protect their patients. I have never seen a nurse or doctor get sued for this. I have never seen them lose their license. And so like, I'm not, and I don't necessarily think they should, right? But what I'm saying is, if you are a nurse who is thinking, I don't want to participate in this, this violates my ethical obligations, I've never seen a nurse get in trouble for that. So just keep that in mind. Maybe, I'm not telling you to break the rules or anything, but like, you know, keep it in mind. What was the first part? Oh, what was unconstitutional? I mean, what is constitutional is whatever they say is constitutional. I think that a lot of the things happening here we could argue are unconstitutional, but specifically I was talking about the holding people in jail until a bed is available, that was considered unconstitutional. And actually a law firm has, at least for the moment, stopped Etowah County from practicing that way in their jails, waiting for beds to be available and holding people indefinitely. But yeah, like indefinite detention is not really supposed to be a thing. You're supposed to have like, right, clear sentences. Oh, there's a hand. I didn't get to speak to these women. I want to, and there were a lot of kind of ethical decisions that went into that. Even reaching out to ask if they want to participate, it's like, how do you know it's me? Like even that could be like such an invasion. So I want to eventually, and I know for sure that some of these folks want their stories shared. Like Heather, who I shared at the beginning, she did every major media outlet possible. She wants people to know what happens. She thinks it's horrible. So I didn't get to talk to the women much. I did interview a bunch of prosecutors who were the first in their states to start kind of playing loosey-goosey with the law. I did an analysis of all introduced legislation, creating pregnancy-specific crimes, developed some typologies there. I did some history stuff, looking at white trash and eugenics in the US. And then the biggest part was analyzing the case documents, and that was a mixed methods, some content analysis stuff. I've got a big SPSS document, just a basic, you know, race, age, distance of time between birth and arrest, that kind of thing. Great question. So the question is, did the prosecutors like express regret, or were they like gung-ho? Mostly gung-ho. All but one of them were guys. But most of them, okay, with the exception of one guy, they were like very nice and like benevolent paternalistic. They don't know what's good for them. And so we're gonna have to force them to see what's good for them kind of vibe. One of the prosecutors had a picture of the Pope on the wall, and like very adamantly, he said he's anti-abortion. He's the one who did that bananas case with the person who was facing prosecution and wanted an abortion. And he was purely punitive. Like he thinks these people deserve to be punished, deserve to suffer, that that's the right thing to do. Prosecutor. Elected. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was curious. You say over and over again that pregnant people, the prosecution of people affect a lot, and I agree. I mean, listening to case studies, I'm curious about whether or not any of these positions are that's interesting. Let the claims so secrecy of the law, and if they didn't get overturned, it really seems like such a sad and political message about the way in which selective prosecution, the force of kind of community, you know, but even sporadic community will to arrest and traumatize all of these people, persecute them is. I mean, even if the case is not returned, just
Oh, yeah.
It still is its alternative.
Yeah. So so one of the advocacy groups that helped me collect data is a legal nonprofit in New York. They used to be called National Advocates for Pregnant Women. Now they're called Pregnancy Justice, and they write briefs to help mostly public defenders, almost all public defenders, because these folks are poor, to help them make these cases. And for a long time, if they got that kind of intervention, the case would be thrown out. And that's because it is happening in such a loosey-goosey legal manner. So like Tennessee passed a law. That was fine. It had a 2-year expiration period built in, which is bananas for a criminal law. They're like, we don't know if this is good, but we'll just see for 2 years. But South Carolina and Alabama, it was the courts. And to me, the Alabama case is the most interesting. So Alabama had no legal recognition of the fetus. And it wasn't until 2006 that 2 laws were passed. One is called Brody's Bill, and that was passed specifically in the wake of a murder of a pregnant woman. She was going to name her baby Brody. That same year, they were kind of freaking out about meth in Alabama, and a Democratic senator introduced a new criminal bill creating the crime of chemical endangerment of a minor. So if you have a child in an environment, is the word that was used, where you have drugs or you're manufacturing drugs or you're using drugs or paraphernalia, that's a felony. Said nothing about pregnancy. The legislature actually explicitly talked about how this would not apply to pregnancy. But about 6 months after that law went into effect, just a handful of prosecutors around the state were like, what if the uterus is an environment? And so you smoking weed is having a child in an environment with drugs, right? And started using it that way. And I don't know, the Alabama Supreme Court is like a special group of people. And they were fine with that. And they actually went further than any of the prosecutors had. They said that this application of chemical endangerment could start from conception. And they said that knowledge of pregnancy was irrelevant. And they said that it was not limited to illicit substances. So you could be 1 hour pregnant and not know it and drink a glass of wine and you were a felony child abuser. That is legally so bananas. And the prosecutors that I talked to were like, not to be skeptical, but we just kind of make stuff up. I mean, like really, it's whatever they can convince them. South Carolina was a little bit more gradual. They had a case, a wrongful pregnancy loss case. And then we had a, like, can a fetus recover damages from its parents or something like this? There was a case with a husband who harmed his wife and they wanted to recognize the fetus that way. But these protective laws about protecting pregnant folks from intimate partner violence, right? Leading cause of death among pregnant people is murder. I don't know if you knew that. We need to do something about that, right? But we passed these laws saying we're going to protect your fetus from your domestic abuser. And then we use those laws to punish pregnant people. And the women that we're protecting in the way we frame that legislation, almost always white, almost always a white victim of violence. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no. Right. Yeah. 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 Because I want to shorten your timeline a little bit. So like there were like a few arrest cases for Alabama, for example, a few here or there, kind of starting in the early 90s, not really that many. After the chemical endangerment law went into effect, 2006 through 2022, we have almost 800. So like in some cases, it is really random, really haphazard. Some prosecutor gets a bee in their bonnet and they want to try something. And then sometimes, which Alabama more so than the other states at this point, it is full on systematic. It appears that they are testing now at every hospital. Though I do want to see like if there are any hospitals that are just not participating and like how they are justifying that. But yeah, so it seems really time specific. Hopefully it'll slow down. But since Dobbs, it's only sped up even more. Yeah. Yes. I would like it if that were so. We're supposed to be able to project medical treatment, but this isn't medical treatment. There's like no, so look into that Ferguson case. I mean, they really dig into it there, but they're not providing medical treatment. Folks don't know that they're being tested. They almost never know. If you show up to the hospital in any situation and someone in a white coat hands you a cup and tells you to pee in it, you're probably gonna do that, right? It's like, I don't know, they need my pee for some reason. Like, I don't know, it's taking my fluids. Like, oh, was it for like crash care? I don't know what for veterinary medicine, but for these tests, no. I mean, the Supreme Court case that addressed this said if it's a public hospital and you don't have reason and you don't have a warrant and you're only doing it for law enforcement purposes, that is unconstitutional. But if it's a private hospital, if you test the newborn instead of the pregnant person, or you can put it in writing on a form that they sign when, because, you know, you get to the doctor's office, they hand you the clipboard, you sign the things, right? Without reading that fine print that you could be consenting to something there. You could be consenting to them taking your fluids and testing them. It's really nefarious. I mean, we do the same kind of stuff when we still are, forcibly sterilizing people, right? That like, oh, you're in labor and don't speak English. Here's this English language consent form to sterilization that no one's gonna translate for you. And I don't know, did y'all know part of your brain shuts down when you're in labor? Because like, we don't need to remember this. Like part of your brain functioning like turns off when you're in labor. And so like asking someone to like read and consider this legal document, like, no, like you're trying to keep your body going in the moment. Just in between contractions, doing your legal analysis. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, a Zoom question. Yes.
Someone asked if there have been any changes in the use of restraints for pregnant people, and that has been
yes, there have been some changes for shackling. A bunch of states banned it, passed laws banning it. There have also been a bunch of court cases finding it torturous, unconstitutional, also like full-on unnecessary. Like in general, people who are in labor do not try to flee during transport. And if they do try, you're probably gonna be able to catch them. However, even in states where it is banned, it still happens. Because who are we shackling? People that we literally put in cages and none of us see them. Like, right? I mean, criminals, right? Like, we don't care about them. And they don't have a lot of recourse. Who are they going to write a letter to complain to? Right? Everyone reads the letters that leave the prisons or jails. So it is still happening. There was a lawsuit in Cook County, Illinois, a few years ago that it was banned, and they were still doing it like as a regular practice. There are also, and this might have changed in Virginia. I don't know, the laws are changing so quickly, where it was the prison association that banned shackling and not the state, which is like weird. Right? But I guess like even the folks who run these prisons recognizing that like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Pretty interesting. Without enforcement, none of this is anything, right? And so when people are marginalized and in the shadows, they get away with this kind of stuff. Someone else? Yes. So I don't have information for these specific cases. I wanted to know all about what happened to their children. I mean, even Heather, I know that she got to visit with her kids once a week in the halfway house because she told the New York Times that. But all of this child records are sealed. They're not public generally. And so you can't FOIA them. But there is other research on the impact of these things. Witnessing a parent being arrested, deeply traumatizing. Separation from parents at any age, but especially in infancy, deeply life-changingly traumatizing. And so, yeah, even if the only person you care about here is the baby at the end, we're not helping the baby at the end with this stuff. One more Zoom question.
Professor Paul Chen, and I'm just going to repeat it. So pretend I'm. All right. You've shared many heart-wrenching stories about how pregnant persons have been mistreated, even abused by law enforcement. And honestly, all those stories are undeniably horrific. I doubt a single person here would think that any of the women deserved what happened to them or to their newborn fetus or unborn fetus. Below is my question. All right, this is my field, so I'm trying to figure out what the takeaway of your talk is. Are you arguing that because of these stories, we should abolish these laws and policies? As you noted at the start of your talk, such laws may or may not be responsible for causing people these horrific, tragic, degrading experiences. And because anyone can be, quote unquote, the pregnancy police, doctors, nurses, police, neighbors, strangers, your concern, as you seem to conclude with, does not seem to be with either the law or even law enforcement, but with specific zealous, busybody individuals or society in general whose over-eagerness to protect pregnant persons and unborn fetuses can lead to such horrific harm-causing unborn. Finally, I think others would suggest we should definitely improve or reform our policies affecting pregnant persons, but not necessarily abolish them. If that's your argument, then I can't imagine most people disagree.
I want to abolish not just the pregnancy police, but maybe all of them. I don't believe in prisons or jails. I mean, I know people and love people who've been incarcerated. I've also been a victim of violent crime. All prisons and jails do is potentially keep someone away from you for a certain amount of time. And then they come out and they might be okay or they might not be. Who am I targeting? Who do I want to change? I mean, I want these prosecutors to cut it out. And I want these judges to stop being little goofuses. And like, I don't want these kinds of laws to be passed. But I guess, I don't know, as an anarchist, I don't really have a lot of faith in these institutions to begin with. I am very concerned about every single one of you in this room. I want to talk to people about pregnant people. That like, we need to shift the way we think about pregnant people. We need to understand that we have been, and including abortion, but we don't even have to talk about abortion to get into this, that we've been treating them as second-class citizens. I think we need to recognize that that has been happening for a long time. And we need to shift this, right? So like, yeah, if your neighbor won't report you, great. Anywhere along this path, if we can throw a wrench in, right? Like that nurse has decided not to test you because they know they won't get in trouble. Your neighbor has decided not to report you because they care about you and they know it's not going to help. That prosecutor won't do it, one, because it violates the norms of their job, and two, because it's not helpful. And actually, there was a question about, and I think the person's gone now, if any of the prosecutors regretted it. And I forgot to, one of them did. And he was so interesting. He's in South Carolina. He's a legislator now. He was a prosecutor and he came in as this like young and dashing, like hard on crime guy. And he prosecuted a very high profile case of a woman who murdered multiple children, Susan Smith case. And so he built credibility as a tough on crime guy. And he was really eager to throw these folks in prisons and jails. He was involved in the drug testing, one of the first in the state. But there were these two ladies at the local drug treatment facility who like came and gave him a talking to and some lessons about how drug treatment works and doesn't work, and about what it means for pregnant folks specifically. And he listened and learned and stopped prosecuting people. And when he explained it to me, he had a few different things. He said, like, I'm a prosecutor. All I have is a hammer. Prosecute things, right? It's like taking a machete to a situation that needs a scalpel, is how he described it. Fully inadequate, shouldn't be something right? We need social services, we need healthcare, we don't need some guy prosecuting folks, right? He also compared it to Moses, baby Moses in the basket. And he was like, you know, I'm fishing and I see a baby in a basket and it's flowing down the river, and I go in the river and I get that baby out, saved it. And I go back to fishing. And then 5 minutes later, there's another baby coming down the river, and I go and get that baby. And eventually, I need to figure out who's putting the babies in the river. Like, maybe I could just stop them and I don't have to catch down the line. And so for him, the putting babies in the river, that's trauma, that's deprivation. And he actually told me his own niece had substance use disorder for opioids and died while she was pregnant. This was after he'd stopped doing these prosecutions. But I think for him, that really made it real. And he said this, I'll never forget the way he sounded when he said it, like, I know that girl loved her baby. I know she wanted to get better. And I know she had all the resources in the world. And it still wasn't enough. And so what sense does it make for me to get these folks way down the line and lock them up without providing any kind of services for them? He just doesn't make sense. That is a little bit of hope. I don't know, people have a hard time with taking in new information and shifting their position. We call it flip-flopping instead of learning, right? But for that one guy, it stopped him. Kind of amazing. He also compared himself to Pee Wee Herman. The way he looked, there is a picture of him on the front steps of this courthouse after he won this like big nationwide news thing, and the press is surrounding him and his hair's all shiny, and he's like, don't I just look like Pee Wee Herman in that picture? Pretty funny. Any other questions?
Why don't we all thank Professor Howard once again?